Every story we tell is a journey, a thrilling adventure that will keep you hooked from start to finish. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from. We love seeing our community come together from all around the world. And don't forget, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Tomorrow, we have a special story just for you. Trust us, you won't want to miss it. See you on the next adventure. A little girl's last birthday wish. Then the royal guard broke protocol. The morning sun cast a golden glow over the majestic gates of Buckingham Palace, its rays reflecting off the polished brass buttons of the royal guards standing at attention. Among the crowd of excited tourists, Daniel and Laura Carter walked hand in hand, their pace slower than the rest. Between them, cradled in her father's strong arms, was 6-year-old Emma, wrapped in a soft pink hoodie despite the warm 75-degree autumn air. Her body, small and fragile, leaned against her father's chest, but her bright blue eyes shined with wonder. "This is it, sweetheart," Daniel said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "Just like we promised." Emma lifted her head, her face lighting up as she caught sight of the royal guards in their crisp red uniforms and tall black bearskin hats. "They're just like in the pictures," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. Laura smiled, though the weight in her heart made it hard to breathe. She adjusted the medical bracelet on Emma's tiny wrist, her fingers lingering on her daughter's pulse, a mother's unconscious habit after months of hospital stays and sleepless nights. The doctors had given them 3 months. 3 months to make every moment count. Today was Emma's 6th birthday, and this trip was their greatest gift to her. "Remember what Dr. Bennett said," Laura reminded gently. "We need to take it easy today." But Emma wasn't listening. Her gaze was fixed on one particular guard, his towering frame standing rigid as stone, his face unreadable. Unlike other children who giggled and waved at the guards, Emma studied him intently. She didn't see him as a toy soldier or a statue, she saw something deeper. "Mommy," she asked suddenly, tilting her head, "do you think they ever get tired of being so brave?" Laura blinked, caught off guard by the question. Before she could answer, Daniel squeezed her hand. "What do you think, baby?" he asked. Emma thought for a moment, then whispered, "I think, maybe they do. But they don't show it. Just like me." A lump formed in Laura's throat. She had seen Emma's bravery every day, through the needles, the nausea, the exhaustion. And now, standing in front of Buckingham Palace, their little girl had found a reflection of her own courage in a silent soldier who had yet to notice her. Not yet. But he would soon. Staff Sergeant Matthew Collins had spent 10 years perfecting the art of stillness. Every morning, he pressed his 6-foot frame into the crisp red uniform, polished his brass buttons until they gleamed, and assumed his post at Buckingham Palace without hesitation. He had learned to ignore everything, flashing cameras, curious children, even the occasional taunts from tourists testing his discipline. But today, something was different. Through his rigid forward gaze, he saw her. A little girl, no older than 6, cradled in her father's arms, her face pale but her eyes impossibly bright. She wasn't like the other children, the ones who giggled and made faces at the guards. No, she was studying him, really seeing him. Colin's chest tightened beneath his perfectly pressed uniform. He had seen that look before. Not here, not in London, but in a hospital room. Charlie. The name hit him like a gunshot. His little brother had been just 9 years old when leukemia stole him away. Collins had spent weeks by his hospital bed, holding his tiny hand, promising him that real soldiers never showed fear. That's what Charlie needed to believe. And so Collins had been strong. Unshakable. Even as his heart broke. Now, standing at attention, he heard a soft voice float through the autumn air. "Mommy, do you think they ever get tired of being so brave?" The words sliced through his armor. His training screamed at him to remain still, to block out the world. But he couldn't. Not this time. Then, barely a whisper, "I think, maybe they do. But they don't show it. Just like me." Collins swallowed hard. She knew. His gloved hands curled into fists at his sides. He had stood through freezing rain, blistering heat, and roaring crowds. He had held his ground in ways most people couldn't imagine. But this was the hardest test of discipline he had ever faced. The little girl's mother brushed a stray lock of hair from beneath her wool cap, adjusting the medical bracelet on her tiny wrist. Collins knew exactly what it meant. He had seen too many of them before. The doctor's quiet warnings. The countdown of time. And suddenly, standing still felt like the wrong thing to do. Collins fought to keep his breathing steady. His training had drilled one thing into him above all else: never react. No matter what happened, no matter what was said, the Royal Guards did not move. It was a rule, a tradition upheld for centuries. But right now, as he stood in the crisp 75-degree autumn air, his focus wasn't on the weight of his ceremonial rifle or the rhythmic stomps of the changing guard in the distance. It was on the little girl in the crowd, the one who shouldn't have understood his burden, but somehow did. Emma. Her father lifted her a little higher, her frail arms draped over his shoulders as she whispered something to her mother. Then, her voice, small but certain, carried across the courtyard. "Do you think they ever smile?" The surrounding tourists chuckled, their cameras snapping away, oblivious to the war happening inside Collins' chest. He felt it. The tightening in his throat. The weight in his ribs. The impossible pull of something he wasn't allowed to give. Then, her father spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "Remember what you said you wanted for your birthday, sweetheart?" Emma turned her head, her bright blue eyes locking onto Collins, filled with a hope he wasn't sure he deserved. "I wanted to see a guard smile." The world seemed to stop. Collins' stomach clenched. He could feel the weight of 100 unseen eyes, his fellow guards, the officers watching from the shadows, his commanding officer somewhere nearby. A Royal Guard breaking protocol was unheard of. But this wasn't just a child's birthday wish. This was a moment slipping through time, one that wouldn't come again. Collins had lost his little brother before he had the chance to break the rules for him. Now, here he was, standing in front of another child who might not have another birthday, and he was expected to do nothing. He exhaled slowly, his grip tightening on his rifle. The air around him felt electric, the silence stretching too long. Then, he moved. A shift, barely noticeable at first. Then, his head turned, fully turned, toward Emma. The crowd gasped. A wave of whispers and murmurs spread like wildfire. Tourists scrambled to grab their phones, some barely believing what they were seeing. And then, in a moment that defied centuries of tradition, Staff Sergeant Matthew Collins did the impossible. He smiled. A ripple of shock spread through the crowd. Gasps. Whispered disbelief. Camera shutters clicking. Tourists who had spent the morning taking casual pictures now fumbled to capture a moment that felt almost sacred. A royal guard had moved. He had broken centuries of protocol. And then, before anyone could fully process it, he did something even more unthinkable. Collins spoke. "I believe there's a special song for special days like this." The weight of his voice, steady and clear, cut through the hushed silence like a drumroll before something grand. The other guards, still locked in their statuesque stance, shifted slightly, just enough to register that something extraordinary was happening. Emma's mouth fell open, her tiny hands gripping her father's shoulders as if she were afraid this moment might slip away if she blinked. You can talk," she whispered, her voice laced with pure, unfiltered wonder. Collins smiled again, softer this time. "Of course, I can," he said, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "Especially for someone as brave as you, Miss Emma." Laura clutched Daniel's arm, her fingers digging in, tears already streaming down her face. She had spent so many nights in cold hospital rooms, listening to machines beep, praying for time. She had never prayed for something like this, never even imagined it. Collins drew a slow breath. Then, with the authority of a soldier but the warmth of a man who had seen too much loss, he began to sing. "Happy birthday to you." The sound sent a shockwave through the crowd. It took just a heartbeat before the murmurs turned into something else, a chorus. One by one, people joined in. At first, it was just a few voices. A mother near the front. A security officer standing by. Then, a group of tourists. A child tugged on his father's coat, urging him to sing. Then, the other guards, stoic, disciplined, unwavering, broke protocol too. And suddenly, the entire courtyard was alive with song. Hundreds of voices. A single, unified moment. Emma, beaming, pressed her hands over her heart. For the first time in months, her father didn't hear the rattle in her breath. Just her laughter. Just her joy. And for the first time in years, Staff Sergeant Matthew Collins felt like he had won a battle worth fighting. As the final notes of Happy Birthday echoed across the courtyard, a hushed stillness settled over Buckingham Palace. The moment stretched, heavy with something more powerful than tradition, something untouchable, yet undeniable. Emma's face, still lit with pure joy, turned upward toward her father. She looked so small in his arms, so fragile, yet in that moment, she felt unstoppable. I don't need to make a wish, she whispered, her voice barely louder than the breeze drifting through the palace gates. It already came true. Daniel clutched her tightly, his jaw trembling as he buried his face against her shoulder. Laura, standing beside them, pressed a shaking hand to her mouth. They had come here hoping for one last memory, something to carry them through the hard days ahead. But this was more. This was a miracle. Across the courtyard, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Hayes, the commanding officer of the Queen's Guard, had arrived. He had witnessed everything. The movement. The words. The song. And now, he approached Staff Sergeant Matthew Collins with slow, deliberate steps. The crowd held its collective breath. The unspoken question hung between them: would he be punished? Stripped of his rank? Disciplined for breaking one of the oldest traditions in the world? Hayes studied Collins for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then, he spoke. Sometimes, the greatest honor to the uniform is knowing when to break the rules. Collins stood tall, his heart pounding, his gloved hands still at his sides. He had been prepared for anything, except understanding. "Carry on, soldier," Hayes said, nodding once. "Today, you reminded us what real service looks like." Collins swallowed hard. Then, in a single, precise motion, he lifted his hand in a salute, not to his superior, but to Emma. The little girl, still glowing from the magic of it all, hesitated, then returned the salute with her tiny fingers, not quite perfect, but somehow more powerful because of it. Tears blurred Collins' vision. He had fought in wars, stood through brutal storms, faced the hardest of days. But nothing had ever felt as important as this. As the Carters turned to leave, Emma's voice floated back to him, soft and full of quiet certainty. "Now I understand why the guards stand so still, Mommy," she murmured. "It's not because they have to." She looked back at Collins one last time, her blue eyes shining. "It's because they choose to." And as she disappeared into the crowd, Staff Sergeant Matthew Collins knew one thing for certain: he had made the right choice. What would you have done in Staff Sergeant Collins' position? Would you have followed protocol, or would you have chosen to create a moment of joy for a child facing life's toughest battle? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed a moment where kindness triumphed over rules? We'd love to hear your stories. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a powerful moment like this. Your support helps us share more incredible stories that remind us what it truly means to be human.